True War Encounters. Full story. Based on premise. How Sniper Whitefeather and his SVT-40 measured trigger saved scouts trapped behind the ridge. The SVT-40 rifle weighs 4 kilograms, heavier than the M40 Carlos Hathcock is trained to carry, and its woodstock still smells faintly of Cosmoline, despite 3 months of Vietnamese heat. He keeps it wrapped in an olive-drab towel inside his hooch, 2 clicks west of Hill 55, where the firebase perimeter dissolves into triple canopy jungle and the rules bend under the weight of staying alive. The rifle isn't supposed to be here. Marine Corps doctrine is clear. Snipers carry bolt-action precision rifles, 1 shot per engagement, ghosts in the vegetation. But Hathcock, call sign Whitefeather for the feather he tucks into his boonie hat, has been sketching diagrams in a field notebook for weeks, working through a problem doctrine doesn't acknowledge. What happens when precision alone isn't enough? At 13:20 hours, the problem becomes concrete. 6 Marine scouts are pinned 400 meters downslope behind a fallen mahogany trunk, unable to move for 11 hours. 4 PKM machine guns and 2 RPD light guns create overlapping fields of fire from the reverse slope, a tactical web so tight that any movement draws concentrated bursts. The scouts tried twice to break. Both times, the wall of fire drove them back, wounding 2. Now they're bleeding out, and battalion wants to call artillery in 30 minutes. Hathcock knows what that means. The scouts die before the first round impacts. Lance Corporal Burke, his spotter, crouches beside him under the banyan roots, radio handset pressed to his ear. Burke's expression says it all. This is a math problem with no good answer. Hathcock doesn't look at him. He's counting muzzle flashes through the PU 3.5X scope mounted on the SVT-40, watching the rhythm of the NVA rotation, mapping 16 riflemen cycling through 4 positions in staggered shifts. The enemy isn't stupid. They're disciplined, patient, professional. They know rescue is coming and they're ready for it. Burke finally speaks, voice low. Actual says pull back, they're writing them off. Hathcock adjusts his grip on the Soviet rifle, feeling the selector under his thumb. The SVT-40 is a relic, a semi-automatic battle rifle designed for Red Army conscripts, not Marine snipers. 3 months ago, his commanding officer ordered him to turn it in after he pulled it from a tunnel complex following a firefight. Hathcock filed the request to keep it for field testing. The request was denied. He kept it anyway, hiding it in his hooch, studying the typed Russian and Vietnamese manual, learning its quirks, the heavy trigger pull that requires deliberate pressure, the gas piston that kicks if you don't shoulder it correctly, the magazine that jams if you load more than 9 rounds. The battalion S2 called it a propaganda liability during a debrief. The implication was clear. Real Marine snipers don't use enemy weapons. Real snipers make the first shot count with the M40, then disappear. But Hathcock has been running different math in his notebook, calculating scenarios where 1 perfect shot isn't enough. He calls it the measured trigger, a technique built on the SVT-40's semi-automatic action where he pre-indexes 6 targets, commits them to muscle memory, then engages them in rhythmic 2-second intervals. Not spraying, not guessing. Measuring each shot, each breath, each pivot of the reticle, until the enemy's discipline cracks under the weight of precision delivered faster than doctrine says is possible. Burke is watching him now, waiting for the decision. 6 Marines are dying 400 meters away. Artillery will kill them in 30 minutes, and Hathcock is holding a rifle his own command considers useless. Pop, smoke 30 meters east, Hathcock says quietly. White phosphorus. Make them look the wrong way. Burke doesn't argue. He knows what Hathcock is about to do, even if he doesn't believe it will work. Nobody does. Not yet. 3 months earlier, Hathcock had descended into a tunnel complex south of Da Nang after a firefight cleared the surface. The tunnel smelled of cordite and damp earth, lit by his flashlight cutting through dust still suspended in the air. In the 3rd chamber, he found a cache, 2 wooden crates of 7. 62 kick 54mm Tirar ammunition, a stack of typed manuals in Vietnamese and Russian, and the SVT-40 propped against the wall like someone had just set it down to rest. The rifle's serial number was Cyrillic, stamped into the receiver near the rear sight. He lifted it, feeling the weight, and something clicked in his mind. Not about this rifle specifically, but about the problem he'd been circling for months. Marine sniper doctrine is elegant in its simplicity. One shot, one kill, operating from hides so remote you become invisible. The M40 bolt-action rifle is the tool of that doctrine, accurate to sub-MOA at 600 meters, precise enough to drop a man with a single round. But Hathcock had seen the doctrine fail, not because it was wrong, it worked brilliantly for single-target engagements, but because war doesn't always offer single targets. Sometimes you face 4 machine gun positions firing in rotation, creating kill zones that no single shot can break. Sometimes the enemy is disciplined enough that killing one gunner just means another takes his place in 15 seconds. Sometimes precision needs a partner. Speed. The SVT-40 gave him that speed. Semi-automatic, gas-operated, 10-round magazine. It lacked the M40's sub-MOA accuracy, grouping closer to 2 MOA with surplus ammunition, but it cycled faster than any bolt gun in the core inventory. Hathcock carried it back to his hooch wrapped in a poncho, ignoring the regulation that required turning in captured enemy weapons. When his CO asked about it during the next equipment inspection, Hathcock said he'd logged it with the armory. The armory had no such log. His CO didn't push further, but the warning was clear. Don't make this a problem. For 6 weeks, Hathcock test-fired the SVT-40 on the range during off-hours. Burning through ammunition, he scrounged from supply sergeants who didn't ask questions. The rifle had quirks. The trigger required 9 pounds of pull, nearly double the M40's 4-pound trigger. The gas system recoiled hard if you didn't lock the stock tight into your shoulder. The magazine followers wore down after repeated use, causing feeding issues past the 8th round, but the rifle held 0. Even after 30 rounds, even with the barrel hot enough to shimmer the air above it, the point of impact stayed consistent within 2 inches at 400 meters. He developed the measured trigger technique methodically, setting up 6 silhouette targets at varying distances and angles, pre-indexing each position in his field of view, then engaging them in sequence with deliberate 2-second intervals. The rhythm mattered more than speed. Too fast and you lost precision, too slow and you gave the enemy time to react. Burke watched one of these sessions from behind a berm, timing the intervals with his watch. You're cycling every 2 seconds. That's not sniper work, that's suppression. It's precision suppression, Hathcock replied, ejecting the empty magazine. 6 targets, 12 seconds. They don't have time to rotate cover. Burke looked skeptical but said nothing. The next week, a patrol got pinned by 2 machine gun positions in a dried riverbed. Hathcock took the SVT-40, pre-indexed both positions from 300 meters and engaged them in 4 seconds. 2 rounds per gunner, cycling faster than the enemy could process where the fire was coming from. Both guns went silent. The patrol extracted without casualties. Burke stopped questioning the rifle after that, but command did. The battalion S2 pulled Hathcock aside after the action report circulated. You're using a Soviet rifle in the field. That's a propaganda problem if you get captured or killed. Hathcock kept his voice even. It works. I'm sure it does, the S2 replied. But doctrine exists for a reason. Marine snipers use the M40. They don't improvise with captured weapons. Hathcock didn't argue. He just went back to his hooch, unwrapped the SVT-40, and kept refining the technique. Because doctrine was clean and simple on paper, but war was neither. The ridge 2 clicks west of Hill 55 is silent now, except for the distant hum of insects and the faint metallic click of Burke pulling the pin on the smoke grenade. Hathcock adjusts his position under the banyan root, settling the SVT-40 into his shoulder, feeling the weight distribute across his chest and collarbone. The rifle's woodstock is slick with sweat. Through the PU scope, he can see the first PKM position. A pile of logs, 400 meters downslope, the gunner's silhouette barely visible in the shadow. He shifts 17 degrees right, finding the second machine gun. Then the third, then the fourth. He's memorizing angles, calculating lead time, building a mental map of the sequence. Burke tosses the grenade. White phosphorus hisses into the canopy 30 meters east, drawing immediate fire from the NVA positions. Tracers cut through the jungle, stitching the air where the enemy thinks the threat is. Hathcock exhales halfway, settles the reticle on the first PKM gunner's shoulder, and squeezes. The SVT-40 bucks against his shoulder. The 7.62-minute round punches through the gunner, spinning him off the weapon. Hathcock doesn't wait to confirm the fall. He's already pivoting, finding the second position, firing before his breath cycle completes. Then the third machine gun. Then a rifleman scrambling toward the PKM. Then another gunner rising with an RPG tube. Then a spotter ducking behind a termite mound. 6 shots, 11 seconds. The rhythm is mechanical, deliberate, almost musical. Each trigger pull measured, each pivot timed to keep him inside the recoil window. The measured trigger isn't about speed. It's about creating simultaneity, making the enemy believe they're facing overlapping fire from multiple shooters when it's just one man with a rifle that cycles faster than their brains can process. The NVA response is immediate and chaotic. They're firing at the smoke, at the ridge, at shadows. They don't understand that one shooter is hitting 6 positions. Their squad leader screams orders, trying to rotate his guns. But Hathcock is already cycling the second magazine, punishing anyone who moves to fill the gaps. He doesn't kill everyone. He doesn't need to. He breaks their tempo, forces them into reactive mode, turns their overlapping fields of fire into isolated pockets of confusion. Downslope, Sergeant Kowalski sees the window and doesn't waste it. He drags 2 wounded Marines toward the draw while his team lays cover with their M16s. Hathcock keeps cycling. A rifleman at 380 meters, another machine gunner trying to reset his PKM, a grenadier crouching with an RKG-3. The SVT-40's barrel is hot now, the gas system hissing with each shot, but the rifle holds 0. 43 seconds after his first shot, all 6 scouts are in dead ground, scrambling up the reverse slope toward Marine lines. The NVA are still firing, but they're shooting at ghosts. Burke calls it in. Scouts are moving, all 6 mobile. Then quieter, almost to himself. "How the hell did you do that?" Hathcock doesn't answer. He ejects the third magazine, chamber checks the rifle, and starts low crawling backward into the jungle. The answer is written in muscle memory and math, in weeks of range time with a rifle command said was useless, in the gap between what doctrine teaches and what actually saves lives. The scouts are alive. The rifle worked. And somewhere in a command tent 2 clicks away, someone is about to realize that maybe the regulations don't cover everything. Do you think you'd trust the official methods, or trust what your own hands and eyes tell you works? Comment which side you'd choose, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. 72 hours later, Hathcock sits in a tent outside Da Nang. The SVT-40 disassembled on a field table between him and 2 men who represent everything the rifle contradicts. The first is a 2-star general whose name Hathcock doesn't catch, face weathered from years in the Pacific Theater, eyes sharp and skeptical. The second is a civilian contractor from Quantico, a weapons analyst with a clipboard and the kind of detached precision that comes from never having fired a shot in anger. Burke stands near the tent entrance, arms crossed, watching the interrogation unfold. The analyst taps his pen against the clipboard. "Walk me through it again. 6 targets, 11 seconds. You're claiming sustained accuracy with a Soviet semi-automatic at 400 meters. "I'm not claiming anything," Hathcock replies evenly. "I'm telling you what happened." The general leans forward. The after-action report from Sergeant Kowalski says you suppressed 4 machine gun positions simultaneously. His word, not mine. Simultaneously. It wasn't simultaneous, Hathcock says. It was sequential. But the intervals were tight enough that it felt simultaneous to them. That's the point of the measured trigger. The analyst frowns. You keep using that term, measured trigger. That's not in any manual. No, sir, it's not. So you invented a technique using an enemy rifle that you weren't authorized to keep, and now you're asking us to validate it? Hathcock's jaw tightens, but his voice stays calm. I'm not asking for validation. I'm explaining what worked. 6 Marines are alive because of that rifle. You can write that up however you want. The general picks up the SVT-40's bolt assembly, turning it over in his hands. The Tokarev action is simple, robust, designed for conscript armies and mass production. The opposite of the hand-fitted precision Marine snipers are trained to expect. Why this rifle? Why not an M14 on full auto? Because full auto is guessing, Hathcock replies. You burn through a magazine in 3 seconds and hope something connects. The measured trigger is aiming. You pre-index your targets, commit them to memory, then engage each one with deliberate precision inside the recoil window. The semi-auto action lets you cycle fast enough to break their tempo, but you're still putting each round exactly where it needs to go. The analyst scribbles notes. And the enemy didn't adapt? They didn't rotate fresh gunners in? They tried, Hathcock says. But I was already punishing anyone who moved to fill the gaps. That's the psychological component. Once you break their confidence, once they realize moving gets them killed, they stop thinking tactically. They just start hiding. Burke shifts his weight near the entrance. He watched the whole thing through binoculars from the ridge, timing each shot, and he still doesn't fully understand how Hathcock turned 6 disparate engagements into one coherent suppression event. But he saw the result. 6 scouts alive, NVA positions neutralized, and a rifle that wasn't supposed to work becoming the only thing that did. The general sets down the bolt assembly and looks at Hathcock directly. You violated protocol by keeping an enemy weapon. You used unauthorized equipment in a combat operation. By every regulation, I should confiscate this rifle and put you on report. Hathcock says nothing. He knows how this ends, with the SVT-40 in a supply depot somewhere, tagged as evidence of bad judgment, while the official record quietly forgets that it saved 6 lives. But the general doesn't reach for the rifle. Instead, he looks at the analyst. How long to draft a field assessment on semi-automatic precision suppression? The analyst blinks. Sir, you heard me. I want an analysis of whether this technique has tactical applications beyond this one engagement. Use Corporal Hathcock as your primary source. He's the only one who's actually done it. The analyst's pen hovers over the clipboard, and Hathcock realizes something unexpected is happening. Doctrine isn't being rewritten, but it's bending just enough to acknowledge that maybe, in specific circumstances, the official methods aren't the only methods. 3 weeks later, a memo circulates through Marine sniper schools. Semi-automatic precision suppression, tactical applications under review. Day. The memo never becomes doctrine. It circulates for 6 weeks through training command, gets reviewed by 3 different committees, and eventually lands on a desk in Quantico where someone stamps it under advisement and files it in a cabinet that nobody opens again. Hathcock hears about this second-hand from Burke, who heard it from a gunnery sergeant rotating back to the States. The official position is clear. The measured trigger technique worked once, in one specific circumstance, with one specific sniper. That doesn't make it policy, but something quieter happens, something that doesn't appear in memos or official reviews. The SVT-40 stays in Hathcock's hooch, wrapped in the same olive-drab towel, and when new snipers rotate into the Hill 55 firebase, they ask about it. Burke tells the story: 6 scouts, 11 seconds, 4 machine guns suppressed, and the new snipers listen with the kind of attention that comes from knowing they might face the same impossible math someday. A few ask to see the rifle. Hathcock shows them the modifications. The PU scope mounted with improvised rings, the magazine springs he replaced after they wore down, the way he files the sear to reduce trigger pull from 9 pounds to 7 without compromising safety. One corporal, fresh from sniper school, asks the question command couldn't. Why does it work when doctrine says it shouldn't? Hathcock field strips the rifle on his bunk, laying out the parts in sequence. Because doctrine assumes the enemy has infinite time to react. One shot, one kill works when you're patient, when you're picking targets one at a time from a hide. But when they're disciplined, when they're rotating gunners in shifts, when they've got overlapping fields of fire, you need to break their tempo faster than they can adapt. The measured trigger does that. It's not about killing faster, it's about disrupting faster. So it's psychological, the corporal says. It's cognitive, Hathcock corrects. You're giving them more information than their brains can process in real time. 6 targets dropping in 11 seconds feels simultaneous, even though it's sequential. Their training says spread out, rotate cover, maintain fire discipline. But when every position is taking accurate fire within 2-second intervals, training breaks down. They stop thinking tactically and start reacting emotionally. That's when you've won. The corporal considers this, then asks the harder question, why didn't command adopt it? Hathcock reassembles the bolt, sliding it back into the receiver with a metallic click. Because admitting it works means admitting the M40 isn't always enough, and that's a bigger problem than they want to solve. Burke, listening from across the hooch, finally speaks up. The scouts sent you something. He hands Hathcock a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside is a bottle of Jack Daniels and a note written in Kowalski's angular handwriting. You weren't supposed to be there. Hathcock reads it twice, then sets the bottle on his footlocker. He drinks half that night with Burke, quiet and methodical, and buries the rest behind the hooch in a waterproof ammunition can. In 37 days, he'll rotate home. The SVT-40 will stay here, pass to another sniper who'll wrap it in a towel and keep it out of sight, who'll practice the measured trigger on the range when command isn't watching, who'll understand that sometimes the best tool is the one doctrine forgot to account for. The secret at the center of the measured trigger isn't mechanical, it's philosophical. It's the understanding that precision and speed aren't opposites but partners, that doctrine teaches you how to fight yesterday's war, and that the men who survive are the ones willing to trust what works over what they're told should work. Hathcock never writes this down. He doesn't need to. It's encoded in the rifle itself, in the worn stock, and the replaced springs, and the PU scope that holds 0, no matter how hot the barrel gets. And when the next sniper picks it up, they'll learn the same lesson. The truth isn't written in manuals, it's written in the gap between the first shot and the last target falling. 2 years after Vietnam, a Marine captain teaching at sniper school in Quantico tells a story about a technique called the measured trigger. He doesn't use names. Officially, the technique doesn't exist, and the rifle it was developed with was never approved for field use. But he describes the mathematics of it. 6 targets pre-indexed, 2-second intervals, semi-automatic precision, creating the illusion of simultaneous suppression. A few students ask if they can practice it. The captain says the school doesn't have the equipment. What he means is, the school doesn't want to acknowledge that sometimes one man with an unauthorized weapon proves doctrine incomplete. But in the hooch at Hill 55, the SVT-40 continues its quiet migration. After Hathcock rotates home, the rifle passes to a corporal named Diaz, who hears the story from Burke and asks to borrow it for a patrol. Diaz returns it 3 days later with a hand-typed note describing a successful engagement against 2 RPD positions. After Diaz, it goes to a lance corporal named Hayes, who modifies the gas system to reduce recoil and adds a leather cheek pad to the stock. Hayes passes it to Sergeant Mills, who uses it twice and then rotates stateside, leaving the rifle wrapped in its towel for the next rotation to find. Each sniper adds something: a minor adjustment to the scope rings, a replacement firing pin, a better trigger spring. The rifle becomes a living archive of field knowledge that exists outside official records, improved by the same incremental precision that makes a good sniper. Nobody reports it to command. Nobody files paperwork. It just moves through the rotation like a secret handshake, from one competent shooter to another, carrying Hathcock's lesson in its worn wooden stock. Trust what works, not what you're told should work. In 1987, a documentary filmmaker interviewing Marine veterans asks Hathcock about his confirmed kills and his time in Vietnam. Hathcock talks about patience, about reading wind, about the discipline of waiting for the perfect shot. The filmmaker doesn't know to ask about the SVT-40 or the measured trigger, and Hathcock doesn't mention it. The story stays where it belongs, in the field, among snipers who understand that some truths don't need official validation. But 20 years later, a gunnery sergeant training scout snipers at Camp Lejeune describes a drill. 6 silhouette targets at varying distances. Engagement sequence in 2-second intervals. Emphasis on precision over speed. He doesn't call it the measured trigger. He calls it rapid sequential engagement. The terminology is different, but the technique is the same. Somewhere in that evolution from field improvisation to training doctrine, Hathcock's innovation got absorbed and sanitized, stripped of its origin story, but preserved in its essential truth. Sometimes you need to break tempo faster than the enemy can adapt, and sometimes that requires tools doctrine doesn't approve. The scouts Hathcock saved that day, Kowalski and his team, scatter after Vietnam. 2 stay in the Corps. 1 becomes a contractor. 3 go home and never talk about the war, except with each other, once a year, over a bottle of Jack Daniels they share in silence. They don't know the details of how Hathcock saved them. They know he used an enemy rifle. They know command wanted to call artillery instead, and they know they shouldn't be alive. That's enough. When Kowalski dies in 2003, his family finds a photograph in his desk. 6 Marines on a ridge, tired and alive, taken 3 hours after the rescue. On the back, in Kowalski's handwriting, doctrine said this was impossible. The SVT-40 itself disappears sometime in the early 1970s. A firebase gets overrun, equipment gets destroyed or captured, and when the dust settles, the rifle isn't listed in any casualty report because it was never listed in any inventory. But the idea survives. In Iraq, in Afghanistan, in training ranges across the United States, Marine snipers practice rapid sequential engagement with semi-automatic rifles, never calling it the measured trigger, never mentioning a Soviet rifle or a sniper named White Feather, but executing the same rhythm, the same 2-second intervals, the same philosophy that precision and speed can be partners if you're willing to measure both. If this story reminded you that sometimes the best solutions come from those willing to break the rules, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.